Welcome to the Life After Sugar podcast, the podcast that's not just about sugar, but about your relationship with it and also with food and especially with yourself. So if you want to discover your life after sugar and hear inspiring stories from all kinds of people who also cut out sugar in their way, at their pace, for their own reasons, this is the podcast for you. Because when you take away the sugar, you can finally discover the real sweetness in your life. I'm your host, Netta Gorman, and today's episode is with two lifelong food addicts who share their simple solutions and habits that freed them from food addiction and obsession with food. I'm talking with Paige and Jamie today, whose podcast I was on not so long ago, called Real Food Recovery. And as you'll see, we have a lot of things in common and a lot of things to talk about. We'll get to our chat in just a minute. But first, I just wanted to tell you that if you're looking for some free resources about how to get rid of cravings, then I have plenty for you. Come check out the Life After Sugar Facebook page and subscribe to the Life After Sugar YouTube channel, as well as my Instagram account at My Life After Sugar, which is where you'll get all kinds of inspiration so that you can see that it's perfectly possible to live a happy and active life, even if you don't eat sugar. You can also check out my TikTok account at Netta_Life After Sugar. All right, so here's my chat with Paige and Jamie. So I'm here today with two guests, Jamie and Paige from Real Food Recovery. Lovely to have you here. And can you tell us a little bit about how you met first and how you each came into recovery from food and especially from sugar?
Sure. Jamie, do you want to go first or do you want me to go first?
You can go first, Paige. Go ahead.
I craved sugar from my earliest memory. I mean, I was a sugar crazed child, and I didn't fight with weight when I was young, so it was never a worry for me. In fact, I love sugar so much. I think that's why I gave birth, is so I could do Halloween, continue to do Halloween with my kids and disguise myself behind trick-or-treating. But I continued on that pattern till I didn't. And it only became a problem when menopause started happening, and that dessert diet only didn't work so much for my pants anymore. So I realized I had to do something. And I did hate the sugar binges, but I could always out exercise my calories up until when things started changing. But I just couldn't figure out how to get out of it. And it was so weird because I was so ultra controlled in every area of my life, except for this one sugar freak out that I would have a couple of times a month. And then I just go back to strict, and then fall off the wagon big time. So I then figured out, I heard about food addiction, and I'd never really knew that it was like a thing until I heard about it and started understanding that sugar addiction is a real thing. And then instead of gobbling up sugar, I tried to start gobbling up information as much as I could. I discovered this food addiction recovery program where I met Jamie, and that's where things started to turn around for me. And I started to get a handle and develop tools. And finally, I had something to work with, and it was freedom. So I have been sugar-free for, over 2.5 years, something I never thought I could do. And I heard people in the recovery program saying that they had conquered the sugar binges, and I'm like, no way, but it works. So we have discovered some tools that can help us out of this dark place. And then through that recovery program, I met this wonderful lady, Jamie. So I will let her tell her story a little bit.
Lovely.
So one of the reasons that I love working with Paige and I love having a platform with Paige is because we have very different backgrounds. We sit on two different sides, opposite sides of the weight spectrum, the weight experience, sugar addiction, food addiction spectrum. My story was, I too was a very young food and sugar addict, but I wore my addiction. And I could have, because of things that I, situations and experiences of childhood, I grew up seeking food for comfort at a very, very young age. I mean, we're talking while I was still an infant. I was nursing in large quantities. And I sought food for comfort as soon as I could feed myself. And I started to sneak food. I started to eat and hide food. And I could have easily become an alcoholic. But I like to say at 4 years old, it's more socially acceptable to eat a brownie.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or 2 or 3 brownies than it is for me to throw back a martini.
Sure.
So I am very aware, because I wore my addiction for so long. It ended up creating obesity, morbid obesity in my physical appearance. Most of my life, I was morbidly obese. And finally in 2008, realized that I didn't understand food addiction at the time, but I knew I had a problem, and I knew that I wasn't going to I was in my 30s, and I knew I wasn't going to make it to 40. Okay. That's how I was at that point. I had, as Paige likes to say, life had kicked me in the teeth so many times that I really was trying to kill myself with food. And I saw that, and I wanted better for myself. I didn't think that I was done on this planet yet. I thought that there was a reason that I was here, and I hadn't found it yet. So I did not want to get surgery. I did not want to take pills or have any kind of medical intervention that, from a magic bullet perspective. I really just wanted to learn how to take care of my health. So I began to do that, working with a dietitian, working with a counselor. I, in 4 years, lost about 200 pounds. And have kept that off, and then, added another loss of 50 pounds on top of that as I've refined things over the years since then.
Wow.
So my recovery is coming up on, it'll be 15 years in January. And I am immensely grateful for that, for the journey. And that led me about, 4 years ago now, it led me into a food addiction recovery program where I understood that that's what I had, and that I needed to find some help for it. Once I accepted that that's what it was, that's where I met Paige, and we bring our stories to people because we really do run the gamut of what this addiction can do, what sugar can do in a life and in our health, to take us away from our goals, and away from our relationships, and away from our potential. So I love working with Paige because we really do bring two very different perspectives that really seem to resonate with people.
Yes, and it's great to hear those perspectives, because it's really shades of grey for food addiction, sugar addiction. It's not an on-off switch, I like to say. And there's many of us on that continuum. And I think the outside vision of what food addiction is all about, if it's actually recognized at all, which is another issue, is you are or you're not addicted to food. And when I say food, we know that we're talking about sugar, especially.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So
sugar, fat, salt.
Right. So you have a podcast together, and I'd like you to tell us about how that started and how that is connected to your recovery.
Oh, I have a story for you. Everybody lean in. This is a good one. This is how divinely inspired our podcast was. And so we know this podcast at Real Food Recovery was meant to be on this earth. I was getting ready to do this podcast with a couple of other people, and they kind of had backed out. But one of them, I was going to do it with, backed out like the day before we were getting ready to meet with our podcast technician and get all this set up. That day, I just happened to send Jamie a message and say, hey, are you still doing your podcast? And she said, you know, not really, but I'd love to do it if you're still doing it. And literally within 24 hours, the person I was going to do it with said, you know, I'm really not, I think I don't want to do anything with partnerships right now. And within that, all just overlap, that like that same conversation with Jamie and her saying, I think I'm out, and meeting, literally we had a meeting set up to talk about getting us going with this podcast, all within a 24-hour period.
Yeah, it was very
And
fast.
it might have even been like 8 hours before this meeting that everything kind of finalized. And I think it was that morning I had the conversation with my other friend who said she didn't want to do it. And that afternoon was when I was having the podcast meeting with the guy. And I'm like, okay, here we go, Jamie. And we just went in. We brought her in on Zoom because it was in the town that I live in. And I mean, from then we hit the ground running. That was back in April. And it just has exploded. We have done all kinds of great things. And then from this podcast that was so phenomenal, it was just a natural offshoot that we created our own food addiction recovery online community. And we've developed, our logo is the tree of life, and we have these big branches on recovery. We have 4 core foundational principles for guiding lights for people in food addiction recovery. We start with food or food prep and sleep, movement, and spirituality. We feel like those are the cornerstones, the foundation of building a solid recovery program. It's the baseline. And then we have all these other branches that accentuate a beautiful recovered life. But it helps people put a spotlight on. So many people are like, I don't even know where to start. What do I do?
Exactly.
And so we really believe, start with the basics. This is not some big complicated secret thing. We have developed this program and put it on a silver platter and say, here you go.
Here's the answer.
Show you. So Jamie, add to that. I've talked too much. What do you want to say?
Yeah, you know, so I had a YouTube channel. It wasn't a formal podcast. It was a YouTube channel that I was doing some of my story on, and I wanted to start a podcast. And it was so I had talked to another person about partnering with them in the whole food plant-based world, and it just wasn't the right fit for them at the time. So I thought, you know, I'd love to do this. And I was really asking, you know, the universe for some inspiration here, because I was really feeling called to start a podcast, not because it was going to be our retirement plan, but because it was just, I had something to share, and there was a platform I wanted to start. And so when Paige texted me that morning, I remember we were on our community call in our old community. She texted me, you know, hey, you know, you still thinking, would you ever consider doing a podcast? And it was like days after I'd asked for guidance on what to do. And I was like, yep, here we go. And I just followed it. We clicked immediately. And we realized, again, this whole spectrum thing, right? That we really do cover the spectrum. And then with her, you know, with her organization and her discipline and my experience, we kind of came together to create these topics that really started resonating with people. And we didn't plan on creating a community from that when we started. We really didn't. We were really just creating a podcast, and we had so many people coming to us saying, hey, we like what you're saying and we want to hear more of it from you directly. Can we like meet with you? Would you ever consider having meetings or doing kind of workshops? And we're like, okay. So we kind of built workshops. We built these ways to interact with people, and we kept getting more. We want to engage with you daily. What can we do daily with you? And then we just kind of built this program and said, okay, now's the time. Let's launch it. It really was divinely inspired. Like, we have no idea how it came to be so quickly. And, you know, we've got almost 15 members strong, and we've got a lot of what we call, you know, interested parties that are still on the outside, that are sort of, you know, waiting to see when they can jump in and join. And it's just, we are so amazed by the community that we're part of, and the communities that we were part of before, that have given us this platform to be able to connect with folks that are struggling in really meaningful ways. And it's not just about, it is those 4 foundational elements, but it's not just, once those are addressed, there's so many other areas, we call them, our other 12 branches of recovery that members can focus on, and need to focus on to have a really beautiful, meaningful existence. And that's really what we're trying to help them get to, is to get those foundational elements in place so that they can really start to explore the other areas of their life that they've been numbing their way through.
Yeah.
That is a perfect point. So stress management, self-care, personal values, creativity, purpose, inner family work, those are all some of those other branches that we work on. And the biggest goal, I think, when people are trying to find a way out of food addiction recovery is, like Jamie said that I say a lot, life can be a series of kicks in the teeth. So when you get this disappointment, when you are uncomfortable in life, we want you to be confident and not be afraid. Why
Exactly.
should you not be afraid? Because I'm going to give you the tools. In real food recovery, we've got the tools to give you to deal with discomfort. We're going to take that discomfort, we're going to stare down the barrel of discomfort. How do we manage this? Let's make a plan. Let's not sweep it under the carpet, because you know what? We resist persists. We want to deal with it. And it's okay. It's not scary. It's in fact, it's less scary to deal with it than to push it away.
Right.
We're going to analyze it. We're going to make a plan. And then we're going to ask ourselves, what do we need right now? How can I love on you? And we're going to make the love bigger than the pain, so the love can swallow up the pain. And oftentimes that starts with self-love. And
Yeah.
what does that look like? How can we take care of those tender parts so that you're not driven into the food for numbing?
For numbing, exactly.
Yes, totally. And in our different ways, we address the exact same issues. And so do I in my program and in the After Sugar Club. And, it's a huge sticking point for people who do struggle with food addiction, or I don't like to call it food because very often it's more to do with sugar and processed foods. But
Exactly.
For people to even entertain the notion of self-love is a huge challenge, because as you were saying, Jamie, this can go back, but both of you, this can go back to early childhood, where we've used sugar / what we call food as a source of comfort because of all kinds of situations that we've lived through early on in childhood. And changing that, or even becoming aware of that, is a huge mountain. How do you help people to just understand the whole notion of self-care?
Yeah. So, well, we break it down because self-care is such a huge topic, and it's out there in the zeitgeist as all kinds of, people sometimes will look at self-care as, I'm going to get myself a tub of ice cream and eat it. That's self-care, right? While sitting in front of reality television, that's self-care. So self-care is a loaded phrase. That's why we have broken it down into these 12 different areas, like Paige was saying. And the reason we do that is because we want people to know that there's a self first, that there's a self to care about, that there is a self, and the self that is capable of caring for us is also inherently inside us. So when we work with our community and we talk about it on the podcast, or we talk about it in this kind of interview, we help our members, or anyone listening to our podcast, how to look at all parts of us, including our addiction, including our struggles with the sugar, with the processed food. We help all of the parts in us to come together instead of being separated. And so one of the ways that we do that is we teach folks that they do have a core self, a loving, adult, compassionate, kind, curious self. And that self is capable of taking care of and healing and reconnecting with all of those hurt parts that we've had through that have driven us to the food or to the sugar for so many years, or to, frankly, to other addictions. We have many
Right.
folks that we come in contact with that have, co-addictions. It's
Right.
very common. Or they've come from a background of alcoholism and now they've settled into sugar addiction. Super common.
Yes.
And what we find is that, hey, you've got this self that's capable of caring for all these other parts. And that is truly what self-care is.
Mm.
And if I can tap into that, we do connection hours 2 or 3 times a day with our members. And so oftentimes whenever you're deep in the addiction, sometimes it's difficult to think clearly. And so they can come into these connections hours, and we as the host can help them untangle their thoughts a little bit so they can clearly see. We can help them with articulating, what is self-care going to look like for me? Sometimes people even need help with, okay, in this next hour, here's what I'm going to do for the hour right in front of me. And if they're struggling, so we have a WhatsApp group that's continually going 24/7, 365. And there might be somebody who's having a tough day, but they have to go to the grocery store. And I might say, okay, I want you to text our little WhatsApp group and say, I'm going in. Here's what I'm going to get. I can take a picture of my grocery cart. And when I'm safely back in the car, I'm going to let my friends here know that I'm back in the car. So that's a way that I can love myself and keep myself safe. And why is that so important? We had another member sharing about how she noticed there's a correlation between whenever she's eating clean and her self-confidence, how she feels about her body, the words she speaks, her relationships, her
Yeah.
marriage. You just are questioning everything, and you feel smaller. But she noticed, whenever I'm eating clean, I get bigger. I'm confident in how I look. I'm confident in what I say. I'm confident in my movement. I'm confident in my relationships with my children, with my husband. So we are helping people understand the direct correlation between food and what's happening between the ears. And then so we put this mirror in front of them, and we help them come to their conclusions, and then just give them some gentle hints to giddy up on down the road.
I just want to take a quick break to say that if this is your first time here, then welcome and thank you for listening to this podcast. And whether you're new or a regular and you haven't yet rated or reviewed this podcast, could I ask you to scroll down and tap on the stars to rate this podcast, and also to write a short review to let me know how this podcast is helping you in your life after sugar. I love reading your reviews, and when you rate and review this podcast, not only does it encourage me to continue making new episodes, but it also helps to share this podcast and have more people see it, so that we can help more people feel better and lose weight with less sugar. So again, thank you for rating and reviewing this podcast and for spreading the word about sugar.
So having a place to come and connect a couple times a day with hosts like Jamie and I, and we have 2 other credentialed hosts, Heather and Shay, that are specialized in this food addiction recovery arena. So we have a very big background in helping people find their way out of hell. I mean, it's pure hell. It's just no way to live. It's very isolating. It's overwhelming. How do I get out of this? Is this what life really looks like? Is it ever going to get better? I guess this is as good as it gets. And I'm just going to have to hide. How can I hide my way through life and keep this going at the same time? It robs us from our ability to govern with reason. And then we're just caught up in this pleasure pain balance where we're fighting just to get out of pain. We don't even have pleasure from the food anymore. We're just fighting to get up to baseline or homeostasis. We're just struggling to get out of pain. So we feel very blessed. This is a labor of love for us to help people get on the path to out of this dark, dark place of isolation.
Well, yes, you're doing wonderful work. Honestly, you're both angels. And
Oh,
As are you.
I have not heard that about myself very often, so I'll take that.
yeah, take that for
As
sure.
are you, Netta.
Have you found
Yeah,
that food addiction or sugar addiction is more prevalent in the US than elsewhere in the world, or is it a worldwide thing in your experience?
Well, the research tells us it's definitely prevalent in the US, but it's not the most prevalent in the US. There's other regions of the world that are struggling in even bigger ways than the US. And that can be linked back to cultural implications. It could also be linked back to the way that our food and processed food has sort of bled out into the other areas and regions of the world. But the ones that are struggling the most, like I'm thinking of some of the Pacific Islanders and some of the areas of South America, and certainly even areas of Asia now are struggling in deep ways with sugar and processed foods. A lot of that seems to be a cultural overlay on top of the processed food addiction that's happening, and that almost exponentially raises the outcomes, the negative health outcomes. What I'm seeing is a real awakening from governments across the world to having to put warning labels on some of the foods, but what they're missing is that there's an addictive component to what's happening in the physiology and the biology and the chemistry of our bodies when we eat these food-like substances.
Right.
And that they really are drugs for us. I also think that you have a lot of breakdown between the government and governments across the globe and the food system, right? That the folks running the food system are in the pockets with, in getting money back and giving money to the government. So nothing, and that's across the world, not just in the US. So a lot of the changes really are not, if people are waiting for the government to keep them safe from processed foods, they're going to be waiting a long time. It's just simply not going to happen. We have to take control of our health. We have to do it for ourselves. Nobody's coming to save us.
That's what we like to say. No one is coming to save us. And so we also like to hit on the point that when you're uncomfortable, discomfort is a clue. So if you're finding yourself in a place of discomfort, that's good. That's, as Jamie likes to say, that's the dashboard lights of your car coming on, blinking. Something's wrong. So that's great. That's what we call self-awareness. It points you in a direction. So go with that. Go with the discomfort. Listen, peel that discomfort back to try and figure out, where is it coming from? What is it telling me? Listen, dial in.
Totally. And we often use sugar for comfort. On the other hand, how comfortable were you, Jamie? 250 pounds heavier. Right.
Right.
Completely
an alien in my own body. I mean, I was pain from the minute that I woke up to the minute that I went to bed, and really sleep, of course, was a struggle. I'm sure I had sleep apnea back then, and all kinds of other issues with sleep. It was emotional pain. It was physical pain. It was, psychological pain. It was pain at the soul level. I really did not have the comfort was, once I realized that the perceived comfort was seconds and the pain was minutes, hours, days, weeks, months, years. I was like, what am I doing? What am I doing?
Yeah, that sounds like a barrel of monkeys.
Exactly.
Sounds like you're having a great time.
Exactly.
And even if for us, Paige and myself, even if we didn't have the struggle with weight, we have the struggle with our behavior and our relationship with sugar. And that in itself is far from comforting, or far from the level of comfort that we believed came from sugar.
Netta, I don't know about you. I'm curious to hear what you say about this. And yes, I didn't struggle with morbid obesity, but I was in mental anguish every
Right.
single day. The chatter in my head is today the day. Okay, if I go off the rails, how much exercise am I going to do? Okay, I'm not going to eat the rest of today and maybe half of tomorrow. And oh my gosh, I've got this other thing coming up, and how am I going to handle that? And I know it's going to happen in, and what will literally, it is like a hamster wheel all day long. It is mental torture, nonstop. Even when I'm asleep, it's still in the back of my mind. You're just in a panic mode, panic, 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 panic. And that's what I was meaning about in real food recovery. We want to take the panic out of discomfort. That if there would be one gift that I could give everybody in the entire universe, I think that is the statement. I want to take the panic out of discomfort. Why? Because we now know what we can do with it. It's not scary anymore. We've got a plan. It's okay. Follow us. We're going to get you on the path to ease and peace and calm. If you could just be calm between the ears all day long, would that not just be heaven sent? I mean, I just think it's the biggest reward life has to offer.
Absolutely, absolutely. And that's where we're headed. And that's so difficult to imagine when you're in the hamster wheel, when you are the hamster.
Totally. Yes.
So difficult to imagine this feeling of peace that I also call freedom from Cravings, freedom, just in general, freedom from this obsessiveness about food. And it's not like food isn't available to us. The problem with North American culture, at the very least, is that it's too available. Or
yes,
say, actually, it's not so much about food. I come back to this whole notion that we lack the proper vocabulary to call all these processed engineered products something other than food.
Exactly.
It's very confusing to call it food addiction because it's not actually food.
Overfed and undernourished.
Absolutely. Yeah. Overfed and undernourished. And
which is why, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
So each one of our cells has a little factory inside our cells, and every bite of food you take ledgers it to the good or to the bad. So if you're filling up on these non-nutrient foods, your cells are still going to be seeking nutrients. So you're still going to be hungry. You're still going to be craving. And it just sets you up for a horrible cycle that you can't figure out what's going on here. I ate, a whole bag of Cheetos. Why am I still, wanting something? So you're right. It's down to a cellular level. Physiologically, we are working against ourselves with the ultra processed food, killing ourselves.
Yes. And it's socially acceptable, even socially encouraged.
It's fun. Every activity that you go to with other people, it evolves around the food and drink. And so one of the things that we tell our people is sometimes you have to make decisions. If I'm in a good position, should I go to that? If it's an evening event, we know that decision fatigue is set in, and some people are weaker by the evening. But if you do have to go, then here are a few things that we can do to help you be prepared before you go. So know thy triggers. We help people know thy triggers. And so you can make decisions on what you are up to, what you are physically capable of doing. And you don't have to say yes to every social activity because, like we said, unfortunately, social activity, and I'm doing fun in air quotes for those that can't see.
Yes.
Most people that think of fun, it's how to have food and drink to the maximum. Right. And because processed foods are engineered to make you consume to the maximum, there is no such thing as moderation in ultra processed food. It was not engineered for you to moderate the immoderatable foods.
Absolutely. Exactly. Yes, that's the sad truth, and we would like to be able to moderate that which is designed not to be moderated.
We're really sure to do.
Yeah. But we're fighting against multi-million-dollar, companies and budgets, and I would even say government sort of recommendations.
Absolutely, which many folks who are tasked and who are passionate about helping people get healthy, you know, dietitians and nutritionists, if at least in America, they are funded, their programs, their certifications, their credentialing programs and credentialing schools are funded by the processed food companies.
Right.
Yeah,
I mean,
it's very ironic.
Well, yeah. And I would say it's manipulation at best.
Yes.
Mhm.
And it's funny because the irony continues when, I don't know if you've had this, but people sometimes ask me, what are your credentials? And in a way, I'm happy not to have any nutrition credentials because no one has bought me off.
That's right.
Oh, yeah, I
Exactly.
like that.
Exactly. And you know, your credentials are your experience and
Yeah.
what you have lived through, what you've overcome, the message you're carrying to everyone else, the way that you're living out that message, modeling that message. That to me is worthy of a PhD.
Mhm. Yeah.
What, you went to the school of hard knocks? Is that what they say?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Exactly.
you know, and I come from an academic background as a teacher, so it was
Sure.
quite a change in mindset to say, well, actually, not only do I not have a degree in either nutrition, sugar addiction, or freedom from sugar addiction, there is no degree, but that's not what actually counts. And I'm not dissing, you know, nutrition studies. It's just that sometimes we look for credentials without seeing where they come from, philosophically speaking, let's say.
Absolutely. Oh, yes. I live in that world all the time. And in my professional life. And you can have a bunch of letters after your name, but if you don't have the life experience to go with it,
Yeah.
it doesn't hold as much weight. No
Yeah.
pun intended.
No pun intended.
Yeah. A lot of those credentialed people still are trying to preach moderation and that there's no bad foods,
Absolutely.
which is a bunch of hooey. If you are somewhere on that addiction spectrum, the only way out for you is abstinence. You cannot dabble with fire. It just simply will not work. And if it has worked, if there's anybody listening and that's worked, moderation, let me know. I'll in air quotes, I'll eat my words. But I don't think there's ever been a human on the face of the earth that is on the food addiction spectrum that can moderate ultra processed food. Just not
To be honest with themselves, to really truly be honest with themselves. You know, it would be, I've been privy to, like we all have, the, you know, the mindful eating movement and the, you know, being spiritually in the 12-step world. They talk about being spiritually fit and you can eat whatever you want. I'm sorry, but that's not life. That's when real life comes at you. You can be as spiritually fit or mindful as you can, but if those chemicals are in our bodies, we're not having normal reactions. We're not able to think critically. Our blood flow is being pulled from frontal lobe back into our amygdala. It's just it's chemistry, it's biology, it's physiology, and that's what's going to rule. Not, you know, I'm meditating before I take my first bite.
Gotcha. Yes.
Well, even the marketers say, I bet you can't just eat one.
Yeah.
That
And
didn't
they're
come from
right.
nowhere.
Yes,
Right.
they have that satisfaction of being right and selling even more. You know, it's yes, I've had that with the people I help as well, definitely. And in a way, I say, well, I eat whatever I want. I just changed what I want to eat, or
Exactly.
rather, I noticed that it changed if I let it. And so that's the other thing. When we use that term, you know, eat whatever you want, it automatically seems to include all the processed junk, but actually it doesn't have to. That's just like a conclusion that we tend to jump to.
Your self-talk, Netta, your self-talk changed. That's why I love the whole concept of bringing self-talk into any kind of recovery. Your self-talk changed. You can eat whatever I want, but you're allowing your knowledge of whatever you want to be foods that take you closer to your health goals.
Yes,
And
absolutely.
don't you guys feel like as you've gotten off the ultra processed food and eating a whole food single ingredient diet that your taste buds change? So anybody listening, there's the good news. The cravings go away. They're
Absolutely.
not as intense. They're not as often. They're manageable is what I'm trying to say. And your body just naturally starts craving this cleaner diet. So that's the beautiful thing, is that your body does work in favor for you trying to get through the recovery process.
Yeah.
Don't you guys feel that same way that
Oh,
your
yeah.
taste buds change?
Totally.
Well, yeah, the gut bacteria heal, change
Mhm.
and morph, and that affects everything, the whole digestive tract. So yeah, absolutely. And it takes time, but it always happens. And pretty soon, once the gut bacteria that are craving the processed foods die off and the sugar die off, then you've got all of this replicated gut bacteria that's craving the healthy stuff, craving the things that take us closer to where we want to be. And that's a great feeling, and you're starting to fire on all cylinders. It's a life changer.
It
Yeah.
is. It is.
And even when you see those sugary sweets now, when I look at them, I just immediately connect that with, ooh, that is a dark place.
Or it's drugs. I just
It's,
look at it as
yeah,
drugs.
yeah.
Mm.
And all my family are, eating that at our gatherings. And, there might be some temptation, but ultimately what wins out is, ooh, that I'm able to think 10 steps down the road now and
Right.
go, yeah, sure, I could take a bite, but that's going to get me nowhere fast to back in a dark, dark place. And that terrifies me more than anything, is going backwards and ever having to exist in that place of bondage. I never want to go back there.
Yeah, that's very powerful. I call that your personal power. We don't necessarily have power to determine what is out there, in the sense of, all these processed foods or the social occasions and whatnot, but we do have the personal power,
Exactly.
even if it doesn't feel like it, to decide how we react to those external stimuli.
100%. Yes. Locus of control. Exactly.
Yeah. All right. So can you tell us how people can get in touch with you, and about the title of your podcast and the title of your program?
Sure. We can be found at Real Food Recovery for You, the number 4, letter U, realfoodrecoveryforyou.com. We also have our podcast. It's called Real Food Recovery. It is available on all the platforms in the podcast land, including Apple and Spotify. And we also have a YouTube channel that, because Paige and I know that so much of what we do is visual, and people like to connect visually with us, we have a YouTube channel which can be found at Real Food Recovery. You'll see our Tree of Life logo. And we also have, again, our community that we are growing and building, that all that information can be found on our website.
Smashing.
Yeah.
Thank
So
you.
if you feel like you're someone out there listening that is needing a path out of food addiction recovery, I hope you give us a jingle.
Well, path out of food addiction. Path out of food addiction.
Yeah.
In recovery.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I'll put your link with the show notes with this episode. And, we have worked together before and collaborated before, and I hope we will continue to do so.
I would love that.
I would
Very
love that.
much.
I don't think
you.
there could be enough, Netta. I don't think there can be enough voices in the processed food addiction or the sugar addiction recovery world. I don't think there can be enough voices.
Agreed. Agreed 100%. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Netta.
What a wonderful chat with Paige and Jamie, who, I mentioned it during the interview, who I think are angels, because they are out there helping people with food addiction. They understand you. They understand the challenges of processed food addiction, and they understand the subtleties of how to overcome food addiction. So do get in touch with them if you think that you are a food addict, because they have specific help for you. And so do I, especially if you're struggling with cravings. We can work together in 2 ways. First, in the After Sugar Club, which is designed to give you support and accountability through our live check-in calls at a more affordable price. The After Sugar Club is always open for you. Join us today. Check out the After Sugar Club private membership when you go to aftersugarclub.com. Click on After Sugar Club in the top menu. And for more step-by-step guidance, and customized support to help you get rid of cravings so that you can slim down and finally feel in control around food, there's my 90-day program, Freedom from Cravings Formula, which opens a few times a year. To get more info about the program and when it next opens, go to aftersugarclub.com and click on the big green button to schedule a clarity call with me so that we can talk together to see if the Freedom from Cravings Formula program is a good fit for you. Thank you for listening. That's it for this week. Keep in touch and see you soon for another episode.